In the 1950s, my white mom was forced into marriage after being caught loving my black dad and endured his brutality while secretly planning her escape with my dad. My parents grew up in the 1950s when black and white people couldn't be together, so when my white mom got caught kissing my black dad, they had him struck and run off. My mom's dad and brothers dragged him into the street that night, screaming about tainted bloodlines. Within a week, they'd arranged my mom's marriage to David, their church's golden boy who everybody said would make something of himself. But behind closed doors, David was a monster who knew her parents would always take his side. He'd backhand her for burning dinner, then show up to Sunday service with his arm around her while everyone praised what a devoted husband he was. When she tried telling her mama about the bruises, she was told to be a better wife. David would also force himself on her every night, even though she wasn't attracted to him at all, saying it was his right and she should be grateful. My mom couldn't take it anymore. She knew where my dad worked at the mill and found him at the colored grocery store. When they first saw each other, he was terrified. Her parents had paid men to hit him that night, threatened to burn his family's house down if they didn't leave town, but she convinced him to meet her at the cemetery, where they started leaving letters under headstones. She told him everything about David's abuse, the beatings, the forced intimacy every night. My dad revealed how her parents had spread lies about black men being dangerous predators to justify what they'd done, all while telling her he'd abandoned her by choice. They fell in love all over again through those hidden letters. When David passed out hammered, my dad would sneak to her back window just to hold her hand through the screen. Then they made a plan. They would try to get her pregnant. David wouldn't dare hit a pregnant woman, and it would give my dad 9 months to save enough money for their escape. So on nights when David was too hammered to notice, my dad would sneak in and they'd try to conceive a baby, desperately hoping to create the life that would set them free. My mom discovered she was pregnant a few weeks later. The forced intimacy stopped, but David found other ways to hurt her. He'd slam her against walls, careful to avoid her stomach. He'd grab her by the hair, throw things at her, leave bruises all over her arms and back. When she started showing, he'd make her wear loose dresses to hide the marks. At church, he'd rub her belly and smile while accepting congratulations, then drag her home and find new ways to make her suffer. When my mom was 8 months pregnant, my dad vanished. He wasn't at the grocery store or the mill. No letters at the cemetery, nothing. With just a month until the baby would come, her escape plan was falling apart. She panicked. Had her parents found out? Had something happened to him? She couldn't search for him without raising suspicions. All she could do was wait, carrying his child while David's abuse continued and her hope of escape disappeared. The moment I was born, the delivery room went silent. The nurses exchanged glances, the doctor cleared his throat, and my mom's heart stopped. I wasn't white. My skin, my features, everyone could see the truth. David's face went from confusion to rage in seconds. He didn't say a word in front of the medical staff, just stared at my mom with murder in his eyes. Her parents stood frozen in the doorway, their perfect lie crumbling before everyone they knew. The whispers started before they even left the hospital. David's violence reached a new level when they got home. My mom said he hurt her worse than ever before. She couldn't walk for days, could barely hold me to feed me. He kept saying he was going to get rid of the evidence, that accidents happen to babies all the time. Her parents came by and saw her condition but only cared about fixing this mess and protecting their reputation. She knew then that David would cull us both if she stayed. Still recovering and barely able to move, she started planning our escape with whatever strength she had left. That's when my dad showed up at the house. He didn't explain where he'd been, didn't say a word when he saw my mom's broken body or me in her arms. He just looked at the bruises, at David passed out hammered in the next room, and understood. He scooped us both up and carried us to his truck. In the truck, Mom clutched me while Dad drove toward the black part of town, checking mirrors constantly as blood from her split lip dripped onto my blanket. Her whole body shook against mine, whether from pain or fear I couldn't tell. The streetlights changed from the well-maintained white neighborhood to the dimmer, scattered ones on the other side of the tracks. Dad's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and I could see fresh cuts on his hands. Mom finally spoke through swollen lips, asking where he'd been all this time. Dad's jaw tightened as he turned onto a dirt road. He admitted David's family had him jailed on false charges, vagrancy they called it, just released yesterday after 30 days. The fresh bruises on his wrists from the shackles caught the dashboard light as he shifted gears. He revealed the sheriff held him exactly that long because David's father was the sheriff's cousin. They'd planned it all along, making sure he couldn't be there when I was born. When we pulled up to a small house with peeling paint, Dad's sister Lucille was already waiting on the porch. She rushed down the steps and helped Mom out of the truck, immediately starting to clean her wounds while making a pallet on the floor. Her hands were gentle but efficient, like she'd done this before. She kept glancing at me, at my skin that told the truth nobody wanted to hear, and her face hardened with determination. Mom insisted they had to leave town tonight. She knew David would come looking, knew her parents would help him, but Dad's truck wouldn't make it past county lines. The gas gauge was hovering near empty, and he'd spent every penny of his savings on bail just to get out. Lucille disappeared into the kitchen and came back with a jar of coins, but even counting it all, they barely had enough for a tank of gas, let alone food or somewhere to stay. Lucille mentioned her church friend drove trucks to Chicago for the meatpacking plants. He left at dawn, might take passengers for the right price. She'd already sent word, but they'd have to survive the night first. That's when headlights swept across the front window. Dad peered through the curtains, and his whole body went rigid. David's car was pulling up outside, engine still running, and we could see him stumbling out with a shotgun. Mom grabbed a kitchen knife while Dad started pushing furniture against the door. David began pounding on it, slurring threats about taking back his property, meaning Mom and me. My cries pierced through the night as the doors shook under his fists. Lucille ran out the back to get help from the neighbors, but I could see through the window as doors locked and lights went out. Nobody would stand against a white man with a gun, not even to save a baby. Dad spotted David circling around to the back window. He told Mom to get down with me just as David raised the shotgun. Dad tackled him right as he aimed, and the blast shattered the kitchen window, sending glass raining down. They wrestled in the mud outside, Dad trying to get the GN away while David cursed and swung wildly. Dad managed to wrench the shotgun free, but David pulled a concealed pistol from his coat. The shot grazed Dad's shoulder before the neighbor's dog started barking and creating chaos, running between their legs. David retreated to his car, shouting that he'd be back with help. His tires squealed as he peeled out, and in the distance, we could already hear sirens approaching. Someone had called the sheriff, probably David himself on his way here. Mom pressed a dish towel to Dad's shoulder while Lucille came back inside, shaking her head. Not one neighbor would help, but they'd all be watching when the law arrived. The sheriff's car pulled up with 2 deputies, all of them David's relatives. They demanded to search for stolen property, which meant Mom and me. Dad tried to explain, but they shoved him aside. Mom had seconds to decide. She grabbed me and slipped down into the root cellar while Lucille claimed she was alone, just tending to her injured brother. The sheriff's flashlight beam swept through the house, passing inches from where Mom crouched with me in the dark. My tiny fist gripped her finger as she held her breath. They were about to arrest Dad for assault stopped when headlights flooded the yard. Lucille's pastor arrived with 5 church elders, all of them witnesses to Dad's injury and David's attack. The pastor negotiated with the sheriff, using careful words about fairness and justice while the elders stood silent but present. The sheriff finally agreed to release Dad until morning for a proper hearing, but warned that accidents happen to runners. The threat hung in the air as they drove away. Mom emerged from the cellar to find Dad's shoulder needed stitches. The wound was deep and still bleeding. That's when old Mrs. Washington from next door finally opened her door. She'd been watching through her curtains and couldn't stand by anymore. She offered her deceased husband's medical supplies. He'd been a doctor for the colored folks before he passed. Her own son had been lynched for less than what Dad was accused of, she said, stitching Dad up without anesthetic while he bit down on a leather strap. While Dad recovered, Mom nursed me and tried to plan. They needed money, transportation, and somewhere David wouldn't think to look. Lucille remembered something. Mom's childhood friend Emma had married a black man and moved to Philadelphia 2 years ago. She searched through old Christmas cards until she found one with a return address. Mom's hands shook as she held it. Emma might help them, if she even remembered their friendship, if she was willing to risk it. Dad's coworker Jerome arrived through the back door, breathless with warning. White men were gathering at the mill, talking about teaching lessons tonight. The smell of kerosene clung to his clothes from where he'd passed them preparing torches. Mom recognized the pattern. David was rallying his church friends just like her family had done months ago, but this time with deadly intent. They weren't just coming for Dad anymore. They were coming for the whole neighborhood. Jerome's wife Patricia followed him in, carrying blankets and food. She made an offer that took everyone by surprise. Her brother's truck was hidden in their barn. He was in prison and wouldn't need it, and it had a full tank plus extra gas cans he'd been hoarding. Mom wrote a desperate letter to Emma while Dad and Jerome started loading what little they could carry. Every shadow outside could be armed men approaching. Through it all, I fed peacefully in Mom's arms, unaware of the danger closing in. Patricia's teenage daughter came running in, breathless from sprinting. She'd been walking home from her job cleaning houses when she saw David's car at Mom's parents' house. The whole family was loading GNs into trucks. Whatever was coming, it would be soon. Through the window, the first torchlights appeared in the distance, moving toward the black neighborhood in a line like fireflies of hate. Mom insisted on going to her parents' house to get her grandmother's ring hidden there, the only valuable thing she owned that could buy their freedom. Dad saw desperation overriding fear in her eyes as she explained where she'd hidden it years ago, inside her childhood doll in the attic. He refused at first, but Mom revealed the exact location, making him memorize every detail. If he went alone, it would appear less suspicious than her showing up at her parents' house. Dad finally agreed when Jerome's daughter Mary, who worked as a maid for white families, burst through the door with more news. She'd seen David at the sheriff's office filing kidnapping charges against Dad. The legal machinery was grinding against them now, making escape even more urgent. Patricia suggested something that made Mom's stomach turn, temporarily darkening my skin with walnut juice. If they were stopped, we might pass as both black. Mom's tears fell as she stained my perfect skin, each stroke feeling like a betrayal of everything she'd fought for. Dad took Jerome's teenage son Willie as cover, pretending to deliver laundry to the white neighborhood while torch carriers massed at the bridge between the two parts of town. They loaded a basket of clean sheets into Jerome's car, hiding tools underneath in case they needed to break into the house. The sheriff's car cruised through the black neighborhood with a megaphone, the deputy's voice demanding the return of the kidnapped white woman and child. Mom huddled inside with me while Lucille rallied the church women. The women formed a circle around the house, their bodies creating a human shield of witnesses against the night violence. They sang hymns to cover my cries, their voices rising and falling in practiced harmony. Through the thin walls, Mom could hear boots marching past, torches crackling, men shouting about purification. She rocked me harder, willing me to stay quiet while the walnut stain dried on my skin. Dad returned within an hour, his face grim. He'd gotten the ring but brought horrifying news. Mom's mother had been packing a suitcase when he'd slipped in through the back door. She was planning to flee town, abandoning her daughter completely. He'd heard her on the phone arranging to stay with her sister in Atlanta, washing her hands of the whole mess. The ring had been exactly where Mom said, wrapped in tissue paper inside the old porcelain doll. Willie reported what he'd overheard while hiding near the mill. David had been telling his friends the plan: burn the black neighborhood, blame it on an uprising, claim Mom died in the fire. The sheriff would back the story, and David would be a grieving widower instead of a cuckolded husband. Mom made an impossible choice then, pulling paper from Lucille's desk drawer. She wrote a confession letter about the affair, hoping to give David grounds for divorce that might satisfy his need for control. Each word felt like swallowing glass as she admitted to adultery, knowing it could be used against her. The church bell rang midnight, and the torches were visible 3 blocks away now. Voices singing about purification grew louder while sheriff's cars blocked the main escape routes. Dad's hands shook as he read Mom's confession letter, recognizing her sacrifice but knowing David wanted blood, not divorce papers. His tears blurred the ink as he folded it carefully, tucking it into his shirt pocket. Old Mrs. Washington knocked on the back door, her weathered face urgent in the darkness. She revealed something she'd kept secret for years. Her root cellar connected to the storm drains. Her husband had built the escape route after their son's murder, knowing someday others might need it. She led them to her house, showing them the hidden panel behind shelves of preserved vegetables. The tunnel was narrow and damp, but it led to the abandoned cotton warehouse 6 blocks away. Mom bundled me in waterproof cloth, preparing for the sewer journey. Outside, the first house caught fire 2 streets over, flames licking at the night sky. The smoke would provide cover, but also made breathing harder. Patricia's daughter Mary arrived one last time with a stolen nurse uniform from her employer. If Mom could pass as a night shift worker with a sick baby, they might make it through any checkpoints. They descended into the tunnels, Mom following Dad through knee-deep water while holding me high above the filth. Rats scurried away from their splashing steps, and smoke seeped through the drain grates above. My whimpers echoed off the concrete walls, but I stayed mostly calm, as if sensing the need for quiet. Dad counted the grates overhead, navigating by memory and Mrs. Washington's whispered directions. They emerged behind the abandoned cotton warehouse where Jerome had already moved the truck. Mom changed into the nurse uniform by moonlight, her hands fumbling with the buttons. Dad hot-wired the truck while she spotted David's car patrolling the nearby streets. He was searching systematically, knowing they hadn't left yet. The cat-and-mouse game played out in the shadows as they waited for him to turn the corner before starting the engine. Willie appeared from the darkness with devastating news. The sheriff had arrested Lucille and the pastor for harboring fugitives, but the distraction had pulled resources away from the search, more sacrifices piling up for their freedom. Mom made Dad promise that if they were caught, he'd take me and run while she faced David to buy time. She knew the cost of that choice but made it anyway. They drove the back roads toward the county line, Mom cradling me while Dad navigated by memory with the headlights off. Every shadow could be a roadblock, every distant light a search party. The truck truck's engine seemed impossibly loud in the quiet night. A checkpoint appeared ahead, sheriff's deputies stopping all cars. Mom affected an exhausted nurse persona, while Dad slouched like a tired orderly. She pinched me gently to make me fuss, adding authenticity to her story. The deputy's flashlight illuminated my face, and he paused at my darkened skin. Mom quickly explained that the father was an Italian doctor at the hospital, showing the forged work papers Patricia had provided. She rambled about the baby's fever, how she had to get him to the hospital in the next county. The deputy seemed convinced until another car arrived at the checkpoint, David with Mom's father, both hammered and demanding to search vehicles for his wife. The deputy, eager to avoid hammered white men's drama at the end of his shift, quickly waved Mom and Dad through as David started toward their truck. They pulled away slowly, forcing themselves not to speed as David shouted behind them. Mom watched in the side mirror as the deputy held David back, buying them precious seconds. 3 miles past the county line, Dad finally turned on the headlights. Mom broke down sobbing, milk leaking through the stolen uniform as the tension released. A gas station glowed ahead, forcing a terrible choice. They needed fuel, but risked exposure. Dad went alone while Mom hid with me in the truck bed, covering us with a tarp. She listened to every sound, the bell ringing as Dad entered, the murmur of voices, the gas pump clicking. The station owner came out himself, and Mom's heart stopped. But instead of calling the police, he filled the tank and extra cans, refusing Dad's money. She heard him tell Dad to just get that family safe. Unexpected humanity in the midst of horror. A police car sped past, heading back toward town as they pulled away from the station. The radio in the truck crackled with reports of fire spreading, the National Guard being called. David's plan was working, but they were beyond his reach now. Mom checked the diaper bag and found a note wrapped around $50. Mrs. Washington had slipped in her life savings during the chaos of escape, understanding the weight of loss and the price of freedom. Dawn broke as they crossed into Tennessee. Mom nursed me in the moving truck while Dad fought exhaustion, his shoulder wound seeping through the bandages, blood and milk, life persisting despite everything. The truck radio reported a Negro uprising in their town, 3 dead, a kidnapped white woman still missing. David's narrative was becoming official history, erasing the truth of what really happened. Mom recognized they could never contact anyone from home again. Everyone who'd helped them now faced retaliation or worse. Lucille, the pastor, Mrs. Washington, all paying for their kindness. The weight of that debt pressed on her chest as heavy as my small body. Dad spotted something in the rearview mirror that made his jaw tighten. A dark sedan had been following since the state line, maintaining perfect distance through every turn. At a crossroads, Mom made a split-second decision. She directed Dad toward Memphis instead of continuing north, hoping to lose their pursuit in city traffic. The sedan followed as Dad wove through morning delivery trucks. Mom spotted the bus station and formed a desperate plan. They would abandon the truck in a black neighborhood and split up. She and I would board a city bus while Dad walked the opposite direction as a decoy. They parked behind a Baptist church and shared what might be their last kiss. It tasted like goodbye, like blood and tears and desperate hope. Mom boarded the bus with me hidden in a bundle of laundry, sitting near black women heading to their domestic jobs. She prayed I would stay asleep, that the walnut stain would hold, that the sedan had followed Dad instead of her. The bus pulled away as Mom watched the street behind them. No sign of the sedan, but no way to know if the plan had worked until they reunited. If they reunited. The bus reached the train station, and Mom used the ring money to buy a ticket north. Her hands shook as the clerk eyed me suspiciously, but the early morning rush provided cover. In the colored waiting room, a kind woman offered to hold me while Mom used the restroom. That first gentle touch from a stranger in days brought fresh tears. Dad appeared at the platform's far end, having lost the tail in Beale Street's morning crowds. They boarded the same train but different cars. Mom in the colored section despite being white. It was safer in disguise than exposed in the white car. She found a seat near the back, holding me close as other passengers settled in around her. The conductor came through checking tickets and paused at Mom's appearance versus her seating choice. Before he could question it, an elderly black woman claimed Mom as her daughter-in-law without hesitation. The train pulled away just as 2 police cars screeched into the station. Whether it was David's influence or routine patrol, they'd escaped by minutes once again. The woman who'd claimed Mom patted her hand gently, understanding without needing explanation. She'd seen enough mixed families fleeing north to recognize the signs. Mom dozed fitfully as the train carried them toward Philadelphia, toward Emma, toward what she hoped would be safety. 20 hours later, Philadelphia's station loomed large and imposing. Mom clutched Emma's address, praying her childhood friend would remember and help. Hunger made me fussy, and the walnut stain was starting to fade in patches. Dad emerged from the colored car looking worse, fever from the infected wound making him unsteady, but he managed to smile seeing his family alive and together. Outside the station, a black taxi driver saw their condition and didn't ask questions. He simply drove toward the address, saying they looked like they needed help. The kindness of strangers had carried them this far, each person risking something to help them escape. Mom watched the city pass by the window. Row houses and shops, people going about their daily lives unaware of the running family in the cab. Emma's house appeared on a tree-lined street in a decent neighborhood. Mom knocked with the last of her strength as Dad leaned against the doorframe, barely conscious. The door opened on shocked recognition. Emma, now 8 months pregnant herself, taking in Mom's bruised face and Dad's fevered state. Without hesitation, she pulled them inside, her husband James already moving to help Dad to the couch. Inside Emma's kitchen, Mom collapsed into a chair, while Emma's 2 young children peeked around corners at me. Their wide eyes studied my fading walnut-stained skin with innocent curiosity. Emma bustled around making tea, her movements careful with her pregnant belly, while James examined Dad's infected shoulder wound. The infection had spread dangerously, red streaks running down his arm. James muttered about needing antibiotics immediately, precious as gold in the colored hospital where he worked. Emma ran a bath for Mom, gasping when she saw the full extent of the bruises covering her body. Purple and yellow marks mapped David's rage across her ribs, back, and arms. Emma promised they could stay as long as needed, but warned that Philadelphia had its own dangers for mixed couples. The city might be north of the Mason-Dixon line, but hatred didn't respect geography. That night, fed and clean for the first time in days, they slept in real beds. Mom startled awake every few hours to my hungry cries and Dad's fever-pitched mumbling. His wound burned hot despite the antibiotics James had managed to procure. Mom pressed cool cloths to his forehead while nursing me, watching the street outside for any sign of pursuit. Morning brought a terrifying sight through Emma's front window. A white man stood across the street with a professional camera, methodically photographing the house. His long lens captured every detail, the house number, the windows, even the children's toys on the porch. Mom's blood ran cold as she recognized the calculated patience of a hunter who'd found his prey. Emma recognized him immediately. The private investigator haunted integrated neighborhoods, selling information to southern families seeking runaway relatives. He'd been responsible for at least 3 mixed couples being dragged dragged back south in the past year. His business cards advertised discreet family reunification services, but everyone knew what that meant. James wanted to contact the police, but Mom knew better. A mixed couple with a baby would get no protection, might even get arrested themselves on trumped-up charges. The investigator was too smart to do anything illegal. He just gathered information and sold it to whoever paid. They had to assume David already knew their location. The next morning, Dad's fever broke, but he remained too weak to travel. Mom faced an impossible choice: stay and risk capture when David arrived, or leave Dad behind to save me. Every hour that passed increased the danger. The investigator maintained his vigil, occasionally walking past the house to peer through the fence. Emma suggested her pastor ran an underground network for situations exactly like theirs. Pastor Williams had been moving people to Canada for years, but it required absolute trust and often meant permanent separation from everything they'd known. Mom held me tighter, knowing that safety might mean never seeing home again. That evening, Pastor Williams arrived with 2 church members. His practiced eye assessed the situation quickly. He'd done this many times before. His gentle manner couldn't hide the steel underneath, forged by years of shepherding desperate people to freedom. He confirmed what Mom feared most. The investigator had already wired David that morning. They had maybe 24 hours before enforcement arrived, legal or otherwise. Emma shared her own story then, tears rolling down her cheeks. Her first baby had died because the hospital wouldn't treat a colored infant in time. The white hospital had turned them away, and by the time they reached the colored hospital across town, it was too late. She helped others now to honor that loss, to prevent other families from suffering the same fate. One of the church women, Ruth, made an offer that shattered Mom's heart. Ruth had lost her own baby just the week before, stillborn after a difficult labor. She still had milk, still had the documents for a baby that would never need them. She could take me to Canada as her own child, traveling with a church group that regularly crossed the border for revival meetings. The offer hung in the air like a knife. Mom's entire body shook as she considered the unthinkable. Keep our family together and risk David capturing us all, or separate to ensure my survival. Dad was still too sick to travel, wouldn't survive the journey north. But without me as evidence, David would have no proof of adultery, no legal claim to force Mom back. The mixed-race baby was his leverage. Without me, he had nothing. With Dad unconscious from fever, Mom made the hardest decision of her life. She kissed my forehead one last time, breathing in my baby scent, memorizing the weight of me in her arms. Her tears fell on my face as she placed me in Ruth's waiting arms. Ruth's own grief made her gentle, understanding the magnitude of what she was receiving. Love sometimes meant letting go, and Mom's love demanded this ultimate sacrifice. Within hours, Ruth boarded a train to Toronto with the church group. Mom watched from Emma's window as the taxi pulled away, her empty arms aching with phantom weight. I was hidden among legitimate travelers, just another baby traveling with his mother to a revival meeting. The document said Ruth's baby lived, and now that baby was me. David arrived the next evening like a storm. He brought the sheriff's cousin and 2 hired men, all of them armed with legal papers and barely concealed weapons. They pounded on Emma's door demanding entry, but found only Mom and Dad, no baby to prove adultery. David's face went purple with rage as he searched every room, even checking the basement coal bin where Mom had hidden before. Without me as evidence, David's position crumbled. He couldn't force Mom back without proof of adultery, and the mixed-race child would have been his only leverage for divorce or criminal charges. He grabbed Mom's arm hard enough to leave new bruises, hissing threats about how she'd never be safe, how he'd find ways to make her pay. Emma's husband had anticipated this. He'd already contacted the black newspaper, and their photographer stood ready to document any violence. David might control the narrative in their hometown, but here his reputation mattered more than revenge. The publicity of dragging a woman through the streets would destroy his carefully crafted image as the wronged husband. The confrontation ended with David spitting at Mom's feet, his hands clenched in fists he couldn't use. He promised she'd never be safe, that he'd be watching, waiting for her to make a mistake. But he left empty-handed, his legal authority ending at the state line, and his power diminished without proof. The hired men followed reluctantly, denied the violence they'd been promised. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived from Toronto. Ruth wrote in careful script about how I was thriving, my skin beautiful in its truth, no longer hidden under walnut stain. She'd given me a new name for a new life, one free from American race hate. The church community had embraced us both, healing her grief while protecting my future. Mom read the letter until the words blurred, then burned it to protect everyone involved. 3 years of applications and appeals followed. Mom worked in a textile factory while Dad recovered and found work at a steel mill. They lived quietly in Philadelphia's margins, saving every penny for immigration lawyers. Emma's pastor provided connection to Canadian sponsors, but the process ground slowly through bureaucratic channels. They existed in limbo, together, but incomplete without me. The immigration papers finally arrived on a rain-soaked Thursday. Mom's hands trembled as she read the approval, hardly daring to believe it was real. Within a month, they stood at the dock preparing to board a ship to Halifax. Emma hugged them goodbye, her own children now old enough to wave farewell. The network that had saved them would continue saving others. The ship's horn sounded as they climbed the gangplank. Mom clutched the small bag holding their few possessions and the documents that would reunite our family. Dad's shoulder bore permanent scars, but he stood straight as they entered their new life. The ocean stretched endless before them, gray waves carrying them toward a place where their love wasn't illegal. Toronto's skyline appeared through morning fog 2 weeks later. Ruth waited at the immigration office, holding the hand of a 3-year-old boy who didn't remember the woman running toward him. But when Mom swept me into her arms, something deep recognized her smell, her heartbeat, the sound of her voice breaking with joy. Dad's strong hands enclosed us both, our family complete again in a country where mixed marriage was just marriage. In our small Toronto apartment, Mom watched Dad teaching me to walk without fear. My skin was beautiful in its truth, no longer something to hide or stain or apologize for. She wrote Emma one last letter, trying to capture how freedom felt like breathing without counting each breath. The price had been everything: friends, family, home, 3 years of my childhood. But we'd paid it together, even when apart. Now I would grow up where love wasn't illegal, and survival didn't require choosing between family and safety. The scars remained, visible and invisible, but scars meant survival. We had survived.